Can anybody tell me, without looking at the screen, what is the best known and loved psalm? 23. You probably cheated and looked at the screen, but don't worry, that's fine. So today I'm going to be looking at Psalm 23, and I'm going to try and bring it to life with some of the stories that could be behind it. And first of all, let's just read through the psalm and then we'll talk a little bit about it. And I'm using the Net translation, which I think is a good translation for catching the poetry behind it, although it might be a little bit different to how you normally read it. I think it's quite an accurate translation. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He takes me to lush pastures to lie down. He leads me to refreshing water. He restores my inner strength. He leads me down the right paths for the sake of his good name. Even when I must walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a feast before me in plain sight of my enemies. You refresh my head with oil. My cup is filled to the brim. Surely your goodness and faithfulness will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the Lord's house forever. I wonder when he wrote this. Was it as a little shepherd boy sitting under a tree, playing his harp and watching the sheep around him? Or was it as an old man looking back on his life? Some of the Psalms tell us at the beginning in the title the circumstances in which they were written, but this one doesn't. It just says it was David. Maybe that's deliberate so that we can take it to apply to the different seasons of our life. I like to imagine that this is how it was written. That as a young man, he began to rough out the draft as a shepherd boy, and as his life went on, he enriched it and wove in the different events until at the end he had the story of his life and his walk with God woven into this beautiful psalm, this wonderful, delightfully captivating piece of writing. So what I would like to do is to go through the psalm verse by verse and suggest a story that might be behind each of these lines in the psalm. And we're going to just see how this could fit together. So David, we know, was once a shepherd boy himself, and before his encounter with Goliath, Saul challenged him about how competent he would be to fight Goliath. And this is what his response was. But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth." Wow. He went after a lion. He went after a bear. This was some fierce young man, but not just fierce young man, but fiercely defending his sheep. What a love. And he knew what it meant from his own experience to have that fierce defense of his sheep. And he's putting that onto God and saying, God, you are like that towards me. You have that attitude to me that you will defend me, come what may. And this is a relationship of value. The shepherd values the sheep, values every one of them. Everyone is precious to God. Can any of you think of a place where Jesus taught this about sheep? The parable of the lost sheep. 100 sheep, one of them was lost and the shepherd went after. So this is the shepherd who values his sheep in this way. And I'm suggesting to you that when David begins, this is the Lord of my shepherd, he's got these feelings about sheep that come in. Lord is my shepherd, the kind of way I was a shepherd to my sheep. Nobody better touch my sheep. I am going to keep them so safe. And so the first thing then I think in this is the Lord is my shepherd. This is what he's saying about God's attitude to us. The second thing is provision. And he says, my Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He takes me to lush pastures to lie down. He leads me to refreshing water. What is behind this? What is it that he has experienced in his life where there is this provision in the wilderness? Well, there was a story that could be behind this line, that he is on the run from Saul. He's got nothing. He's just got a few men with him, and they're desperate. And they've headed off without food. They don't have anything. And quite out of the blue, a woman called Abigail hears about David, and she suddenly appears in God's providence out of the blue. So Abigail quickly took 200 loaves of bread, 2 containers of wine, 5 prepared sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, those are like sacks of grain, 100 bunches of raisins, 200 lumps of pressed figs. She loaded them onto donkeys and brought them as a gift for David and his men. That sounds like lush pastures to me. This is God's provision for him, and this could have been the story that's behind I lack nothing. He is the one that looks after me, that provides for my needs. And so we're going to be reflecting at the end of my message about how each one of us gets something from this psalm, and maybe you have a story of God providing for your needs in an unexpected way. The next thing I want to talk about is the shepherd leading the sheep. And here's a story where there was an extraordinary leading by God of David, which led him into an entirely different direction in his life. One day, the very day that Goliath came and presented himself, and that the Philistine army came and attacked the Israelite army, right at that moment, God's timing was perfect. David's brothers were old enough for military service, and they were out at this key battle, and God did an amazing thing. Right at that time, we read, reflecting on the verse, he leads me down the right path for the sake of his good name, Jesse said to his son David, take your brothers this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread, go quickly to the camp of your brothers. Now Jesse had no idea what was happening in the battle. He didn't know that this was the key moment. And David didn't know, but God knew, and God took him so that he arrived just at this moment, just at this time when Goliath came out. And Goliath came out and attacked the name of God. Now you'll notice in verse 3 there, it says, for the sake of his good name. And God's name was very important to David. And so when he heard Goliath come out, he was very upset by it. And Goliath laughed at God's name. And David said, this very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. Then all the land will realize that Israel has a God. So this is what happened. David arrived at the battle. There was Goliath, and David went out and he spoke these words to Goliath for the sake of his good name. And you know what happened? David was able to defeat Goliath at that point, and the whole direction of his life changed. He was brought into Saul's household, and very soon was on the road to becoming the ruler of Israel. God was leading him, not just at that point, but that was probably the key point where God had his footsteps planned out. And so what a shepherd does, the shepherd leads the sheep into the right place at the right time. But then we have the dark valley, the darkest valley. And this is the reason why I don't think that he could have written all the psalm as a shepherd boy under the tree watching his sheep, because he hadn't seen this level of darkness yet. Here was the darkest valley. Verse 4, even when I must walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This is the dark story. This is what happened. His son Absalom, his special son, his favorite son Absalom, suddenly led a rebellion against him to kill him. With no warning, suddenly, not just Absalom, but a whole army was raised up to attack him. And God worked some amazing provision for him, and we'll see this in just a moment, but he had to leave his house in a hurry. Like, he had to run from his house. He didn't have anything with him, and we'll just see in a moment what happened with that. So the first thing that happened in the darkest valley is somebody came up who was trusted by Absalom, and he said to David, I've got a plan. I can confuse Absalom and make him take a wrong decision which will actually lead to your victory. Just out of the blue. And David said, yeah, do that. And this man went off out of the blue and turned the tide of the battle. But that was part of the darkness that he was suffering, the darkness of this battle. But the other part of the darkness was in his own heart. He had sinned grievously with Bathsheba, with having adultery with Bathsheba, and then to cover it up, arranging that her husband would be killed. What horrific darkness, a darkness in his own heart. And so a darkness outside and a darkness inside. And what does he say there? Look at the end of verse 4. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I found something quite interesting on the internet. This is from a website selling accessories for shepherds. And this is generally, that is a fiberglass, a high-strength staff for a shepherd, and you can buy one today online, and it can be shipped to you. They're still in use. And what's the point of it? The point is to guide the sheep. The point is to be able to direct the sheep where you want to go when they're going into danger, to hook them back out of it, to direct them in the right way. And I found an image of one of these being used. You're going to laugh when you see this. So this is the sheep that wants to go in the wrong way, and the shepherd is pulling it back. And just as a side, some critics of the Bible say, the Bible tells us to hit our children abusively because it talks about the rod as a metaphor. But you know, when it's talking about the rod and the staff in the Bible, this is the image it has. It's not like hitting the sheep, but the idea is using the rod and the staff to direct the sheep and to keep them from getting out of trouble, to guide them and to pull them back. And so we have a story where God did this. When David sinned with Bathsheba, with adultery and effectively murdering her husband, he went down a very dark path. What did God do? God sent him a prophet called Nathan. And Nathan came to him, and he didn't say, oh, you better shape up or God's going to deal with you, because he knew that that would go nowhere. He said, let me tell you a story, David. Once upon a time, there was a man who had one sheep, and he loved this sheep. He just adored it like his own child, and he just looked after the sheep, and he was just a joy, him and the sheep together. And there was a wealthy man in the area who wanted a feast. And he had lots of sheep himself, but he thought, I'd like that one. And he took that beloved sheep from the poor man and killed it and used it for his feast. And David got so angry. He said, who is this man? He's going to face judgment. Who is he? Tell me who he is. And you remember what Nathan said? He said, you are this man. Wow. Suddenly David realized what he'd done. And God, in that beautiful way, had directed him back on the path and brought him to this point where he saw his own evil. Do you want a God like that who will direct you? Do you want God to treat you with firmness but with love in that kind of way? So I'm wondering whether the story about the rod and the staff directing comes from this account. There are many other times that God did this in David's life, so it could have come from many of them, but this one could have informed this account. And then we come to the 5th verse. You prepare a feast before me. You prepare a feast before me in plain sight of my enemies. You refresh my head with oil. My cup is filled to the brim. So let's go back to the time when Absalom was attacking him. He had to run from his life, he and his household, and he had nothing. And they could starve to death while they're on the run. What is going to happen? And something completely unexpected happened. When David had gone a short way beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, was there to meet him. He had a couple of donkeys that were saddled, and on them were 200 loaves of bread. I pity these poor donkeys. 100 raisin cakes, 100 baskets of summer fruit, and a container of wine. The king asked Ziba, why do you bring these things? Ziba replied, the donkeys are for the king's family to ride on. The loaves of bread and the summer fruit are for the attendants to eat, and the wine is for those who get exhausted in the desert. And he says, you prepare a feast before me in plain sight of my enemies. Literally, this is what was happening at this point. You refresh my head with oil. My cup is filled to the brim. Literally, this is what God was doing at this point. Unexpectedly, God is just showing up with a feast, an extraordinary feast in the darkest moment. What a thing to sing about. What a thing to write praise to God about. And then we come to the last verse. Goodness and faithfulness forever. Surely your goodness and faithfulness will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the Lord's house forever. So most translations say your goodness and faithfulness will follow me, but actually it's a bit more active than that. It's better to say they will pursue me, because it shows the relentlessness of God's love for us. And I will live in the Lord's house forever. So there's an interesting story behind the word house, because as David began at the end of his life to just look at what God had done for him, he said to God, you just have this tabernacle to worship in. I would like to build you a house, you a temple. I'd like to build you a glorious temple. And you remember what God said to him? He said, actually, you can collect the stuff, but your son is going to build the temple. But because you've had this in your heart, I'm going to build you a house. And when God said that, he didn't mean a literal house, but he meant like the house of David, a dynasty, a descendants that would come finally to Jesus Christ. And so this is what is behind, I believe, these last verses. When he says, I will live in the Lord's house forever, he's saying, actually, this descendant you're building for me, this line you're building for me, will actually end with Jesus Christ, that you promised that it will come. He didn't clearly know exactly how this was going to work, but this was a promise. And God makes us similar promises in Jesus, that we will live in the Lord's house forever. He will be with us. And I think that I'm going to go to those verses which were mentioned earlier on John 10, because Jesus is the Good Shepherd. And in John 10 we read, verse 11, I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not a shepherd and does not own sheep, sees the wolf coming and abandons the sheep and runs away. So the wolf attacks the sheep and scatters them. Because he's a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep, he runs away. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. What beautiful words these are. And as I've said before, many scholars believe that the order of the Psalms was planned as intentionally to be in that order, because they tell a kind of story. If you look at the first psalm is like an introduction, and at the end, the last few psalms are like increasing levels of praise until the last psalm, 150, is the climax of the whole book. It's a climax of praise. And other psalms seem to riff off one another, and they're deliberately put together and they kind of work together. And the previous psalm, Psalm 22, has got the lines, my God, why have you forsaken me? The ones quoted by Jesus on the cross. And I think that deliberately together, because Jesus experienced the feeling of being forsaken so that we would never have to. We need never have that experience because Jesus did it. The Good Shepherd suffered on our behalf so that we would never be forsaken. And so those two are put together in this beautiful way as a story for our lives. Our Good Shepherd will make sure that we can live in Psalm 23. Now, Satan is the hireling. He's the false one. And he lies and says you can't trust God. He doesn't really care about you. You can't trust him. And that is the big lie, because Jesus says the opposite. He says, come and trust me because I will care for you completely. Now, I think there's something that I need to say about Psalm 23, that many people who love the psalm are not followers of Jesus. He's not actually their shepherd. He's not looking after them. Quite sadly, if Jesus is not your shepherd, you cannot appeal to Psalm 23. But the good news is open, because this is there, because this shepherd's arms are open and he is willing to receive sheep into his fold who want to follow him. If you are not a follower of Jesus, then all you need to do is to come to him and to say, I want you to be my shepherd. I want you to be my Lord. I want to follow you. I want you to direct my life. And he will. His arms are open. He will take you in. And then Psalm 23 can be yours. So this is a beautiful psalm. And all of us are going through different things in our life right now. If you were to write some verses about what you're experiencing right now, you might be writing something in verse 3 or verse 5 or somewhere else, because we're all at different places. And so what I'd like us to do right now is I'm going to close by reading the psalm through, and I want you to think, where am I right now in this psalm? Which bit of this psalm or bits of this psalm are telling my story right now? And then we're going to close by just praying to God and bringing him the things that we are experiencing and asking him to show us that he's a good shepherd in our lives. So let's go through and just pay attention and just say, is this where I am right now? Is this what I need right now? Do I need provision? Do I need defense? Do I need to be pulled out of darkness? Do I need direction? What do I need? The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Actually, let's read this together, shall we? Let's do that. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He takes me to lush pastures to lie down. He leads me to refreshing water. He restores my inner strength. He leads me down the right paths for the sake of his good name. Let's just pause for a moment and just ask ourselves, is what we need from him in these 3 verses? And let's move on. For even when I must walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a feast before me in plain sight of my enemies. You refresh my head with oil. My cup is filled to the brim. Surely your goodness and faithfulness will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the Lord's house forever. Oh, dear Lord and Shepherd, we thank you for these beautiful words. We thank you how you took David through darkness, through fear, through confusion, through lack, and you gave him everything as the shepherd who passionately cares for his sheep. Lord, we thank you that right now you see where we are, you see what we need, and you passionately care for us. Lord, we look to you now as the good shepherd. We thank you that you will not abandon us, you will not forsake us. We bring our cares to you right now, trusting you and thanking you for your goodness to us. In Jesus' name, amen.